This is our news, the weekend edition, and on the broadcast tonight, the Free National Movement chairman dismisses the opposition's no-confidence threat. Meanwhile, the Progressive Liberal Party's deputy questions the Prime Minister's travel to Belgium to meet with European Commission officials. And are conch farms a possible solution to addressing the decline of the popular sea snail?
Our news is brought to you by Alive.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Knowles, and thanks so much for joining us. Topping news tonight, F&M Chairman Carl Culmer is describing calls for the Minnis administration to step down as incredibly ridiculous, considering the large parliamentary majority enjoyed by the party. Culmer says he doesn't even think the four so-called rebel MPs who have opposed the government on some controversial issues would support the no confidence. Our Jared Higgs reports.
It's laughable, you know. You would think that being an accountant, he look at the numbers, 34 to 4. You know, one would expect for him to realize that there's no win.
The calls for a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister were made at a PLP rally on Wednesday night. During the event, Exuma's Ragged Island MP and PLP Deputy Leader Chester Cooper slammed the government over its handling of issues such as its decision to purchase the storm-ravaged Grand Lucayan Resort for $65 million and the 60% increase in VAT to 12%. Cooper previously called on Minnis to resign for what he described as misleading the House of Assembly over a $5.5 billion deal with Oban Energies for an oil refinery and storage facility in East Grand Bahama. Responding to a suggestion by Cooper that the opposition was left with no choice but to put a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, F&M Chairman Carl Culmer says it is unlikely to succeed.
Let's look at the numbers. It's 34, let's exclude the Speaker because he made 35. It's 34 F&M representatives in the House of Assembly. Which F&M would vote with the PLP against their government? It have to be a laughable and a waste of time and energy to say you can bring 4 votes against 34.
4 F&M MPs have voted against the government on issues including an increase in value-added tax and a resolution to rent Town Centre Mall, which is owned by Cabinet Minister Brent Simonet and his brother, to house the General Post Office. Despite their deviation from the party on some issues, Culmer says he doesn't think those MPs would support a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister.
I would not suspect that those MPs will vote with the PLP on this one. The F&M might have little issues, but they know how to contain and work within together. So we will not see the F&M MPs going against the government. Why would you want to go in opposition? You know, so just say those 4 vote against, that's still 8. You cannot, the numbers don't add up.
The F&M chairman also hit back at the PLP's criticisms of the government, which also included an increase in light bills and the tenuous state of labor relations in the country. Culmer insisted that the PLP wants to criticize the F&M on its performance, but doesn't want to be judged on its own performance.
You know, when you look at Brave Davis, he was the Minister for Works. And then you look at Cat Island and the conditions that Cat Island is in. You know, you go to Cat Island, the airport is in a rundown state, infrastructure is not there. And then you look at Centerville, where the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister, represented Centerville. Centerville was, in fact, he took money, allowed money to go back into the Treasury rather than invested into his constituency.
Addressing the increase in public sector job cuts, Culmer says that's due to an unsustainable pre-election hiring spree by the PLP. Reporting for Our News, I'm Jared Higgs.
All right, thanks a lot, Jared. Well, one man is dead tonight after the vehicle he was driving crashed into a utility pole. The incident occurred on John F. Kennedy Drive shortly after 3 a.m. Sunday. Police say the lone male occupant was traveling in the southern lane of JFK in a 2009 Nissan Skyline when he apparently lost control and crashed into the utility pole. As a result, the driver was ejected from the car. Now, when paramedics arrived on the scene, they pronounced the man dead. Now, police are also advising the motoring public who may be traversing on JFK to drive with extreme caution, especially those driving in the westbound lane, as a considerable amount of oil was spilled on the road as a result of the accident. We're told the oil has been covered with sand by the Ministry of Works. Well, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest remaining tight-lipped on whether government would actively look into creating a national lottery. On Tuesday, Tourism Minister Dionisio Diaghilis said he asked the Gaming Board to compile a report on whether it should implement a national lottery. But when asked about it, the Minister of Finance chose to stay away.
That's a question that's better put to the Prime Minister.
Is that something you're seriously considering? Because the
I would prefer to leave that to the Prime Minister and to the minister responsible. It's not a question for me to answer, quite frankly. My job is to ensure that the revenue that that's on the books, that we collect it, and that we properly account for it.
The government is currently embroiled in a court battle involving web shops. Turnquest was asked about those negotiations.
Well, again, as I said before, we intend to collect the government's revenue. The conversations are continuing, and we'll see where we end up.
Shadow Minister for Finance Chester Cooper is questioning why the Prime Minister traveled to Belgium to meet with European Union officials instead of sending Finance Minister Peter Turnquest. Cooper says he hopes that the Prime Minister's trip does not indicate that there is a problem. Our Gillian Gray reports.
The Prime Minister's recent trip to Belgium is being criticized by the opposition's Shadow Minister for Finance. Chester Cooper said he hopes that no damage was done from Dr. Minnis's trip to speak to the financial regulators.
I hope that the Prime Minister's travel doesn't indicate that there's a problem. And I hope that his being there didn't cause a problem. It was quite strange to see a Prime Minister traveling to meet with junior officials when in fact the issue was undercarriage of the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Financial Services, Brent Simonet. So it was most unusual.
Cooper further questioned why the Prime Minister did not send the Deputy Prime Minister or the Minister for Financial Services, who were all involved in the initial process. Ahead of the Bahamas' blacklisting last March, the Deputy Prime Minister Peter Turnquest and Financial Services Minister Brent Simonet traveled to Brussels to engage the EU Code of Conduct group in an effort to avoid blacklisting. Cooper questioned if Dr. Minnis's confidence has waned in his cabinet minister's ability.
These are most technical subjects that require technical expertise, and I would have thought that the Prime Minister would have allowed his technical ministers charged with the responsibility to handle these matters to continue to handle them. So I await the report. I hope it's good news.
Cooper praised the strength of the financial services sector, heralding what he called the creation of high-quality jobs and a strong middle class. He, however, said that countries like the Bahamas, Bermuda, and the Cayman Islands are being targeted and seemingly set up to be put out of business. Cooper said he hoped that the latest changes to the financial services legislation will cause the EU and other governing bodies to finally leave the Bahamas alone.
It's an act to frustrate countries and jurisdictions like ours to be out of the financial services industry for purely selfish reasons. So they are after taxes, as far as I'm concerned, and what they should do is collect their own taxes and not rely on small countries like Bahamas to be tax collectors for them. So we trust that this will be the last stage of their moving of the goalposts, and we hope now that they will go away, because this is a rather frustrating experience for policymakers, and it's absolutely frustrating for industry professionals as well.
Reporting for Our News Weekend, I'm Gillian Gray.
In other news this evening, conch farms aren't a feasible solution to address the declining number of the popular sea snails in the Bahamas. Officials from the Bahamas National Trust say the process is simply too expensive. Jared Higgs tells us more.
As a U.S.-based study recently revealed that the Bahamas' conch population could be depleted in 10 to 15 years, some have suggested conch farms as a viable solution to the problem. Despite that suggestion, the BNT's Director of Science and Policy says it's an expensive and therefore unrealistic endeavor.
The issue with aquaculture is basically that it is extremely expensive to grow an animal from egg straight up to maturity. And for the conch, like in the Turks and Caicos Islands, you'll find that conch farm has closed down now. And what was keeping it alive for so many years was tourism. They were bringing in tourists to help pay, because at the end of the day, it was almost $20 per conch is how much it costs to raise that animal. And then who's going to buy conch at that price when a fisherman could go out and fish conch at much lower rates?
Addressing the issue of conch reproduction, Kent Woodside says lower numbers have resulted in sexually mature conch being unable to find each other.
One of the things is that conch is a density-dependent species, and what that means is that you need a certain number per hectare for them to find each other. So if you think about conch in the water, a boy conch and a girl conch can't find each other very easily and very quickly. So if they are not at a high enough density, they are just not mating. Let's put it that way. So that's one issue. We've been fishing them. Yes, there's still quite a few out there, but they're not at the densities that's ensuring that they're actually reproducing. So you have that as an issue. When scientists are going out there right now, the other issue is that the amount of mature adults has decreased so significantly that there's very little reproduction going on out there. So we just don't have the babies coming in.
The Science and Policy Director says another issue with conch fishing is that legislation doesn't adequately define what a mature conch looks like.
Our legislation right now, the fact that it says a fully flared lip is not enough to ensure that we're not fishing the babies, because we know now that the lip doesn't mean that it's a mature adult. That lip has to be a certain thickness. So that is the other issue. When scientists go out looking for that lip thickness, they're not finding very many. We now know the science is saying that it needs to be at least 15 millimeters thick to ensure that at least 50% of the conch that are that thickness have been reproducing. And so if we want to guarantee mature conch, we have to start looking at the lip thickness. And you do need to give a figure. If you think about it in court, it needs to be black and white in the eyes of the law.
Another suggestion put forth by the BNT is to implement a closed season for conch fishing. Feedback from conch fishermen on that suggestion has been varied, with some acknowledging the need for sustainable planning and others expressing concern for their year-round livelihood. Reporting for Our News Weekend, I'm Jared Higgs.
Well, we will take our first break here, but still ahead tonight. Find out if a date has been declared for the anticipated Progressive Liberal Party's convention. And later on, remembering the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Those stories and more coming up when Our News returns.